So much for joining us. And don't worry, this session is recorded just in case you need to get up for anything. It'll be here just for you afterwards. No worries at all. But again, my name is Ryan Burns. I'm the head of community here at the Startup Network. Today we have an exciting virtual event. This is one of our package of virtual events that we offer to our community. Today we are going into the world of giving, and so this is an introduction to giving with purpose with our friends from StartGiving and Edrolo as well. Today we're going to go into a facet of subjects, but really I'll let the details around this be explained by our amazing speakers today. For the Startup Network, we are, Australia's largest startup community. We have over 70,000 people in our community, whether it's here in Melbourne, where I'm based right now, or up in Sydney, or even across the sea down here in Tasmania. We have people pretty much everywhere. What makes us strongest is the ability and the power of our community to come together and help each other. And so that's what today is about. Today is another example of someone in our broader community explain their message or grow their presence and allow the startup network to assist with that. We are such a grateful community and really act with empathy to each other, and because of that, today's event is no different, and it's just really exciting to be joined by such amazing professionals. Besides today, we have a plethora of events and programs coming up. I think this year we're probably going to be around 120 events we're going to do. So that is quite a lot. It's more than anybody else in the country, and definitely sometimes a little bit too much to handle. But we love it because everybody keeps coming to the event. So every time we roll out an event and we're about to have it start, we feel a little tired, but we're like, oh, okay, let's see how this goes. And then everybody comes to the event and we feel refreshed again. So it's no different than today. Yesterday we had Tuesday we had a big networking event. Next Tuesday we're going to have our open pitch night for sports gaming and AR, VR technology. Please join us for that. I'll put in a link for also if you want to become a member. That would be allowing you to attend free events. It also allows you to attend free programming like our Build and Validate Your MVP program, or maybe you want to set up your brand with our Minimal Enviable Branding program. There's a bunch of different options for whatever stage of the founder journey you're on, or if you just want to support the community, we'd love to have you as a member as well. So I'll put links in for all that. But today's session is going to be about really just an amazing topic in itself, the ability for founders to kind of change the game in the philanthropy sector here in Australia. This is something that I'm very familiar with back from the United States, where founders typically they jump right into this. But Australia is, I'll let the speakers get into this, but let's just say Australia, we got some work to do. And so that's what today is about, with some amazing speakers to kind of tell us their own personal stories and why this is such an important topic. A couple housekeeping items. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to just put them into the chat. We'll moderate those towards the end. We'll do a nice Q&A for everyone and kind of allow you the chance to speak with the speakers as well. If anybody needs to leave the meeting for any reason, don't worry. This is all recorded, and we'll put it up onto the YouTube channel afterwards. But again, thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions for the Startup Network specifically, again, my name is Ryan Burns. Also, my CEO, Vicky Sterling, is on the call. And either way, just reach out to us personally. But I'd like to hand over now to our friend Antonia from StartGiving. She is the CEO of StartGiving, and just really a great person in this space, just not only to learn from, but to kind of lead this conversation. So thank you so much, Antonia, and why don't you take it away?
Thank you very much, Ryan, and good morning, or actually good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to chat with you today. I'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, wherever you're meeting today. I'm on the land of the Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation, and to pay my respects to any elders, past, present, and emerging, and any that may be on the call today. So I'm Antonia. I'm the CEO of StartGiving, and we're a not-for-profit that's been set up to encourage a stronger culture of giving in the tech innovation and startup sector. So we specifically work with successful tech founders to help them start and scale their personal charitable giving. So it might be useful, I think, to give a bit of context about where we've come from and sort of why we've come about. So StartGiving was founded and is fully funded by our founder, Daniel Petrie. So Daniel, if you're not familiar with him, is a former Microsoft executive. He worked very closely with Bill Gates in America at Microsoft back in the sort of late 80s, early 90s, before moving back here to Australia, where he started multiple VC funds, including co-founding Airtree, one of Australia's largest VC firms, which many of you will be familiar with. So Daniel, back when he was in America working with Microsoft, really heard firsthand from Bill Gates and his mother and his family about their belief that if you're successful in life, it's really your responsibility and not a choice to give back. And he was very inspired and motivated by that idea. And it was at the time that Bill Gates was really formalizing and setting up the Gates Foundation. And I think there's very much that culture in the US that existed then and still does now, that if you can't talk about authentically about your philanthropy in America, you're a bit of a social pariah. So he was very caught up with the enthusiasm, the impact and the joy of giving when he was in America. And then he and his wife, Carolyn, moved back to Australia when they were in their 30s, back in sort of the 1990s. And at that stage, they made the decision to move 35% of their wealth into their own private foundation. And that was in the days when not a lot of people were doing that in their lifetime in Australia. And over the years since then, Daniel and the Petrie Foundation have donated literally millions of dollars to the community, including funding a whole load of research into giving. And for years, I think it's fair to say, Daniel Petrie's been a very vocal voice for philanthropy, really banging the drum for more philanthropy in Australia. But his own admission, it's been pretty hard going, he'd say, and a bit of an uphill struggle. But then through his work with tech founders and, successful tech companies, Daniel had the realization really that startup founders have some unique traits that make you quite different, I think, to perhaps some people that have made money or inherited money in the traditional economy. And those key characteristics that sort of Daniel had identified and we've seen playing out time and time again since we sort of launched StartGiving are that by and large, tech founders in Australia are pretty socially conscious. They've got a social conscience, if you like. They also, interestingly, most people aren't from a background of wealth. And when they are lucky enough to be successful, they have a bit of a discomfort with the outsized level of wealth that they're coming into compared to their friends and their family and their peers who are, just normal people who've also worked really hard, but haven't had the same level of financial reward. And that makes them kind of aware of the role that luck has played alongside their hard work in the level of wealth that's coming their way. I think also, founders are by your very nature innate problem solvers. And that makes you very keen to do something meaningful with your money and to have an impact and have an impact now. And all of that we felt makes founders very ripe for the idea of philanthropy and kind of giving back. And so I knew Daniel back a couple of years ago through my work then when I was CEO of another organization called Australian Philanthropic Services. And back in 2022, Daniel called on me to help him make this idea of StartGiving a reality, and we launched in 2022. And so what we do, quite simply, is we provide personalized support to help guide founders through the process of setting up a foundation, either with cash or some of their founder equity. And all of that is at no cost to the founder because everything we do is fully funded very generously by Daniel. And our hope really is that by doing that, we're going to encourage many more people to start giving and really normalize the idea of philanthropy when you're successful, particularly in the tech community. And ultimately, millions of dollars in funding for charities will be unleashed. That's our ultimate plan. So what does all that mean in practice? Obviously, anyone can start giving at any time. I imagine everyone on the call today has at some stage in their life given donations to charities. Many of you may have given of your time, volunteered, and that sort of thing. So, we're all involved often in giving at some level throughout our life. And I certainly meet founders every day at all stages of their company success, right the way from startup all the way through. And for many of the people right at the beginning of your startup journey, setting up a foundation might seem a long way off. It's not really the time to be doing it just yet. But I find people are keen to think through the ideas of what they might want to do one day and how they might do it. And then when founders are ready to do something, that's when we're there to step in and help guide them through the process of setting up a foundation. So I might just quickly explain what those foundations look like, and I won't get too much into the weeds of technical detail. But when we're talking about a foundation, what most people set up is something called a private ancillary fund or a PAF. So generally they refer to them as their own foundation. So how they work is you donate money or equity into your foundation, any assets really, but generally it's cash or equity into the foundation, which is a type of trust. You get an upfront tax donation for any of the money or the assets that are donated into the foundation. They are then held in the foundation, the assets are invested, and you can then give away the money to charity over time. Now, there's nothing wrong, I should say, with directly giving money to charity, and that's how most people do engage in philanthropy. But I think setting up a foundation is particularly powerful, particularly as you become more financially successful, for sort of three key reasons. One is that you don't have to decide on day one which charities you're going to support. What setting up a foundation does is allow you to make a simple decision that you're going to set aside a chunk of your wealth for charitable purposes, and then once that decision's made, you can then spend the time deciding how that money is actually going to be distributed to charity. Secondly, these structures grow over time. So if you donate your company equity or founder equity into a foundation, the value of the foundation is going to grow in line with the success of your company. And if cash is invested into the foundation, which a lot of people will do when they have a liquidity event or an exit of some sort, then that money's held within the foundation, it's invested, the returns come back into the foundation, and it allows you to keep giving more money to charity over time. And all of that's very tax effective. So that isn't the reason that people set up a foundation, but it can be really important in the timing of when founders tend to come into money, which is often when you have an exit or a big liquidity event, and moving some of that into a foundation can help to reduce tax liabilities in a high tax year. Now, generally, people start with about $1 million when they're doing a foundation, so it's not something that's there for everybody, but there's other options that you can do with slightly less, setting up a sub-fund in something called a public ancillary fund, and it's certainly something that's well worth keeping in mind if you are expecting a liquidity event in the future, and it helps to start thinking of your giving now so that you can work out what you want to do when you do get to that point. But I might pause at this point and hand over to Ben, who's actually been on this journey himself. Ben, if you're happy to jump in and maybe talk a little bit about, introduce who you are and talk a bit about your motivations for setting up a foundation and what it's been like for you.
Yeah, thanks, Antonia. Yes, hi everyone. My name's Ben Z. Not many people know how to pronounce my surname, so there you go. I'm a co-founder of Edrolo, which is an education technology business creating resources for high school students across Australia at the moment, but we've got global ambitions as well. I thought I'd just start with how, talking about how I think about giving, and then get into the, the segue that Antonia set up for me. The way I think about giving is in terms of resources. So we've got resources like natural capital, physical capital, and etc. And so I focus on three of those that I somewhat control. The first one is human and social capital. And in my interpretation of that is that's like my time and energy and reputation that I'm putting behind, a cause. Then there's the financial capital, which is what we're probably going to focus on more of in this call. And then the third is the intellectual capital, and this is one that I don't think a lot of startups, or maybe they do think about this, is actually what startup IP, or what IP does your startup own that you could actually provide essentially for free to charity. So, for example, Canva for charities, for example, I believe is a free product for charitable organizations. So that's how I think of it, and think in those buckets. And in terms of my journey of giving, to get me to the point where, my family decided that, as a joint decision that we would set up a path, I'll start at the very beginning, which is probably very similar to a lot of people on this call have experienced themselves. So I actually started by giving when I got my first professional job as a cadet auditor with KPMG, and that was simply where I was. I think I was just naturally interested in what this thing World Vision was, and what these people were doing at the shopping centre pulling people in, talking, and I had all these photos, if you remember this, of children that you could sponsor. And I'm like, oh, what's going on here? So it's just actually just got to chatting, and yeah, anyway, signed up and started donating there. And that's, you know, again, that's financial capital. A few years later, with my wife, we took a big trip mid job changes. And we spent a lot of time, we've been a couple of times now, at a rural children's home and refuge in Western Thailand. And we gave a little bit of money. We were on a very tight budget at that time on a world trip. But most of it was actually our human capital, our time and energy that we put into volunteering and supporting children, teaching English and doing a few, I shouldn't have, you know, it was pretty dodgy. I'm not a very handy person, but I was like installing floorboards and stuff, like, yeah. And then fast forward a few more years, and we set up Edrolo with my two co-founders. And from the very beginning, we wanted to make sure that as many students as possible could access our resources. And so we actually started from the very beginning donating our product to families that were facing financial hardship within their school community. But also working with charities like Les 20 Men, Ronald McDonald House Charities, and Skyline Education, who are very focused on supporting children with specific needs. Ronald McDonald House Charities for children who are sick, unfortunately, and at hospital a lot of the time. So we actually support those students with providing our resources. We got those. So again, that's that intellectual capital bucket. The other one that I started doing as I got more experience under my belt was actually volunteering. So volunteer board roles in particular, where I felt I could add a bit more value and be more, helpful. So I'm on a sub committee to the board at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute of Medical Research, which is now called WeHi, and also at a girls' school. And so I'm getting as much back from those positions as I am giving, in my opinion. So it's been fantastic doing it that way. And again, that's my human and social capital. And then with the growth of Edrolo and with the support from our investors along the way, we managed to build a great business. It's still going today, obviously. And so there was an opportunity as part of one of our funding rounds for me to, at the same time, transfer some of my personal holding in Edrolo into a PAC. And that's where I came across Antonia for the first time, but had met Daniel Petrie many, many years before because Airtree led Series A round in 2014, late 2014. So I've been getting to know Daniel for a long time and consider him a fantastic mentor and human being overall. It was, I guess the stars aligned because I was thinking about with that funding round of Edrolo's, I was thinking about giving earlier. I didn't know what to do, so I was speaking to accountants, speaking to other founders who I thought might have done something, and it just so happened I let Daniel know, and he's like, "Hey, we're just getting started on this thing." He didn't say this, but in my mind it was said this. But do you want to be the guinea pig? And I'm like, "Yeah, for sure." And so we got started, and that's how I got to know Antonia and utilize their service, which it's been an amazing experience so far. But I think I'll pause there. You're on mute, Antonia. Sorry.
Sorry about that, the classic on-mute moment. Thanks, Ben. I think it's great to hear your experience firsthand, and I think it's not an unusual journey that a lot of the founders that we're talking to at the moment sort of go on. And I think one of the interesting things, just reflecting on that, to consider about philanthropy is that when we talk about philanthropy, I think there's a real tendency that people think of philanthropy as being something that only applies if you're a billionaire. It's like super high end. It's for people that have got a lot of money to give away. But an idea that we're very big fan of at StartGiving is the idea really of starting early and getting started as soon as you can. Because just like with your startup, where you start with a good idea, you iterate, you try things out, and you sort of build it on the move, it's a great thing to be able to do that with your giving as well. And to really start doing some thinking early about just the thinking around what you're passionate about, what it is, where it is you might want to give your time and your money, and various other forms of capital you've got, as you pointed out, Ben, like where it is you might actually want to do, so that you're, you're trying to find things that align to those things that you're interested in and passionate about, and also to do a bit of research about it early. I mean, I think a lot of people get caught up in the there's a lot of charities out there, and people can get quite overwhelmed and caught up in the concerns about there's too many charities. I don't know where to start. I don't know how to have an impact. So I always just encourage people to spend a bit of time writing down what it is you actually want to do, getting online, doing some research, finding organizations out there that might interest you, and particularly looking at the impact that they're having, and also going beyond as well, just the top sort of 10% of charities. So I think a lot of people, we're used to seeing the World Visions and other big charities like that do a fantastic job. But there's also, when you're starting small, you can find charities that are aligned to the amount of, that can do a lot with the size of the gift that you're able to give. I think a lot of people realize that there's 65%, I think it is, of all charities are very, very small, with an annual revenue of under $250,000. Many of them have, very lean staff or might be entirely volunteer run. And small donations there can have a really outsized impact, but it takes a bit of time to, dig around, find those charities, maybe volunteer with them, get involved. And then you can really start getting a feel for where your money makes a difference. And then over time, as you start to scale up your wealth, your giving can scale up as well. And often by the time people are like incredibly wealthy, that approach does look different again. So if we look at some of the, the really well-known bigger philanthropists, if you like the founders of Canva, who've, Mel and Cliff, many of you have known, have committed to give 80% of their wealth away to charity. And we're seeing other sort of the really big billionaire philanthropists stepping into that space now as well. And it's interesting to see, I think, compared to the traditional philanthropy that we've seen, that a lot of the drive, I think, with the tech founder and entrepreneurial community is to try and find high impact opportunities that can be deployed at scale. So if you look to the US or you look to here, like Canva, for example, are literally trying to eradicate sort of poverty in Malawi by providing cash transfers to the poorest people through a charity called Give Directly. In the US, you see things like the Gates Foundation that have worked hard to get rid of malaria. It's really big bet, impactful, scalable philanthropy that people move towards, but none of them started doing that all day, on day one. They all came from a background of having been thinking about how they wanted to have an impact. So my real encouragement to people is always that the important thing you can do is just really kind of get started and do something now.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. And for context for everyone, in terms of my journey on this giving journey, is I'm just completed my second year of giving from the path. So I thought I'd go in and be quite concentrated on what we would be supporting, but I've actually found that being quite diverse is quite helpful, because you get a good feel of where your money's going, how people are using it differently, the different sort of updates that you might get from different funds and so different charities and so forth. Your interests evolve too. We're not in a static world. We're in a very, very interconnected world, and things are changing rapidly every day. We ended up adding a couple of new ones this year. Last financial year, that I didn't know about the year before. So, you could say we're taking a bit of a scattergun approach at the moment. But to Antonia's part, that was the whole idea. We just wanted to start and give it a go and see what happens from there. On that note, it's super important, and I think all charities will say this, if you are writing checks to charities and they're not as large as you personally like them to be, or as they would like them to be, it's best to give in a unrestricted sense, because they know, a lot of the charities do know where to direct those funds. So that would be one word of advice that as opposed to funding a particular project and that a charity could do, we've been tending towards sorry, I've lost the word. I did say it just before, but untied funding, so they can do whatever they need with that funding.
Yeah, that's right. I can see a few rounds of applause there coming across the screen. I think that absolutely, that I think I 100% agree with that. That the more the research that pays to do is to look at how a charity overall, the impact that they're having, rather than getting sort of caught up in detailed project analysis of a small project and what your money might be doing within that project. The more it can be in sort of unrestricted, absolutely, the better. And please, I'd encourage anyone, if you have got any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat if there's anything you'd like to ask either me or Ben. Just one quick question I did see there was why you'd set up a foundation versus a public benevolent institution in the setup. Just to touch on that one very quickly, a public benevolence institution is a different type of charitable status that tends to be given to people when they want to operate their own charity. So it's a slightly more like setting up a private ancillary fund or a foundation like that is a lot more straightforward and easier, sort of cheaper and less time consuming for somebody who literally wants to sort of set up a foundation, put some money in there. And although they might be actively involved, just sort of give that away to charities rather than running their own charitable programs themselves. If you're more involved in running a charitable program, you'd be more likely to set up a public benevolent institution or your own charity then. But most people that we speak to are really looking to give money to charities that are already doing the great work rather than sort of setting up their own, I think. Any other questions from anyone? Just having a quick look.
Looks like Georgia has a question. So they became a PBI earlier this year, and she'd love any tips on how to find founders that want to donate money or services like Ben was describing. Is there somewhere we can share products or services that would be helpful?
Yeah, great question. I mean, we're at StartGiving, we're pretty charity agnostic in the sense that we haven't got a top list of charities that we put up somewhere and push people towards. We're very much focused on encouraging founders to kind of articulate and work out what they're passionate about and do that thinking and that research and get involved themselves. And we connect people up to other founders and others giving in the space so that they can really learn together. So, you know, it's tough finding those founders. You need to find people, as with any fundraising, who have an interest in what you're giving to and some alignment to it. I think there's not, unfortunately, one sort of straightforward database of things where you can find founders. Is there anything you want to add to that around tips of how you'd find people, Ben?
Yeah, well, you found me, so there's one of thousands, but you want to find those thousands. So I would actually suggest that you look at, there are databases of startups, and I would actually do a look through that sort of data and look at, what the startup is, what space they're in, and perhaps look at the funding announcements and that have come through. And you might actually find some good threads to pull that way in terms of startup founders to go after. So that's what I would recommend. And yeah, maybe start network, like joining that. Like you got the startup network here, for example, but there's other networks as well, like StartMate, that run regular events like demo nights and things like that, so you can actually get into the industry that way. There's also Blackbird Ventures run a fantastic conference called the Sunrise Conference. It's in Sydney every 2 years. So last year it was in Sydney, and then this year it'll be in New Zealand, I think in Wellington, I believe. And so that's where a lot of VCs and startup founders gravitate towards. So, go to where they are would be my advice, if you've obviously got the capacity to.
Yeah, another question here just about whether we see increased interest among givers supporting charitable activities overseas. And I think, tech founders are as broad as people are. Obviously, there's a lot of diverse interests and ways that people give, but I think there are some trends that we see emerging within that tech giving sector, particularly that perhaps are slightly different to the broader community of philanthropy. And one of those is, I think there is a real interest in giving overseas, both because of the impact of, your money can go a lot further sometimes in a developing country. And I think that founders by their nature have a very global worldview. They're from diverse backgrounds personally, and also are running companies that work around the world. So I think there is definitely perhaps a heightened interest in supporting overseas activities from a school or a particular program in a different country, or just broader ideas about trying to find solutions to global poverty and health issues and ending hunger. And there's also some other areas that I think appeal in this space. Like, one of them is, I think we see a greater level of giving in the around climate change and environmental giving. Very much spearheaded at the moment by Mike Cannon-Brookes, one of the Atlassian founders, who's established Boundless, which is his impact investing and philanthropy arm, to really try and drive the energy efficient future of Australia. So I think there is an interest in that, perhaps more so than you see in traditional philanthropy. And then also a bias towards logic and metrics that many of you will have heard, perhaps, of the effective altruism movement, which is really trying to find organizations that very rationally can save the most amount of lives with every dollar. I think there's been a lot of interest in some areas of the tech community where there's a bias towards sort of logic and metrics and a rational thought process around giving. And then broadly, people are interested in all the things that the rest of us are around things such as health and certainly education. I think tech founders are avid learners themselves, and we see an interest in education broadly, but also a few people supporting things like greater educational teaching practice for neurodiverse young people and children, and encouraging better teaching in that space, STEM education, coding in schools, those sorts of things. So there are a few differences, but I think it'll be really interesting to watch how that emerges over the coming years. I'm just having a quick look here at the questions here.
Yeah, I think Christine was just getting into she was agonizing over whether she should shape the way of using the money she brings in, so she can feel better that she won't worry about it now. But it's more about whether to organize as a non-for-profit or give directly to 10% to every age tier.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I haven't touched on, but I think that's an interesting point as well. In most founders' journeys, is another part of the way that you can give is through the company that you founded. And so we work alongside another organization called Pledge 1%, which many of you may be familiar with. Pledge 1% encourages companies, they've been particularly strong in the tech space, so spearheaded by Atlassian and Salesforce, to give 1% of staff time, 1% of products and services, 1% of profits, and 1% of equity to charities. And people can choose which part of that pledge they do, but they've really been doing a lot of work to kind of garner the actual tech corporate sector to do more giving. So I think that is often the first part of the journey. Like when you're in the early stages of your startup, one of the easiest ways you can have an impact is to give of your products and services through your company, and to encourage your staff to get involved before necessarily you've seen the sort of personal financial benefits from building the company and exiting it. So I think that intersection between company giving and personal giving is an important one, and they both play like a significant role. So
yeah, and then Jen had a question for Ben, just wondering how you're giving back has then flowed into how you run your company. Is there opportunities that you're now offering your employees?
Really good question. I unfortunately, due to illness, I've left Edrolo. So as my giving journey has taken flight, my Edrolo journey has kind of somewhat. Well, my day-to-day operational role is not there, but what I will say is before I left, we did put a lot of work into actually figuring out which charities we wanted to support, because we kept getting approached by many different charities in terms of providing our resource to them, because word had got out. And so we just wanted to make sure we had a good framework for saying yes or no as quickly as possible, but have a reason for that answer that we could stand by. So that was one thing. And I guess the interesting thing in that is I set up a little working group for that, but I didn't want to lead it. So I guess, yeah, that's one thing that did change is, I stepped away from leading those initiatives and tried to get it led by people, at the coalface, if you want to say that. And it seemed to be working quite well.
Great. And then Anita had a question. They're a PBI and they offer services similar to a PAF donor advised fund. She was wondering which is less restrictive for founders wanting to start their giving.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, there's that, private ancillary funds are by no means the only way that you can choose to structure your giving. I think they work particularly well if you want to donate some of your founder equity to start a foundation. Probably a PAF is a very good way to go with that. But for anyone who is starting with straightforward cash donation, one of the other things that's very easy for people to do is to set up something called a sub fund in a public ancillary fund. So that's like a communal ancillary fund in which you can set up your own sub fund, and you can do that with a lot smaller donation than you can in a PAF. We're talking sort of tens of thousands rather than hundreds of thousands, if you like. So you can start those. They have all the same tax benefits. You can support the same range of charities, but it can be a much easier way when you're just getting started. So, and there's funding circles that you can join. There's collective giving groups. There's all sorts of other ways that you can partner with people, either to share due diligence and research around the most effective charities, or really just to go on the learning journey with other people like yourself as you explore who you want to give, how you want to give, and amplify your impact by pooling donations together. There's a few opportunities like that out there that are, worth exploring.
Yeah, and Antonia and the team at StartGiving, it's so helpful in unpacking what is possible and what's out there in terms of structures and things like that. So I found that super valuable. That was right now, that's what we're focusing on, and it's like 100% of our focus. But really, that was probably only 20% of the value that StartGiving have provided. It's all the support once you've made that decision. In my case, I wanted to start a PAF and create a PAF, and that's when StartGiving really rolled out the red carpet in a sense to help get that going with lawyers, accountants, etc. There can be some complex things that need to be worked through, and if I was doing it on my own, I would have a lot more grey hair than I do now. So StartGiving are very, very helpful and generous with their time in supporting the creation of your chosen structure or vehicle and getting it going.
Cool. And then Ben, I think Jen would love for you to expand on the framework that your work group came up to make the decision you were thinking about.
Great question, Jen, and thank you for the hard questions. It was very specific to Edrolo at that time. We wanted to make sure that it was aligned to our mission. So the mission at Edrolo was to improve educational outcomes for young people. So we had to make sure that we were going to be ticking that box. I'm trying to remember what else was in the matrix. There were a few things. I'm sorry, my memory is, this was over 3 years ago now. But we kind of made a matrix of the things that were important to us, and a lot of it was to do with operationally, can we support it at scale, for example, because as a startup, most startups are not profitable. So every minute you're not doing on working for your clients or customers, you're hamstringing yourself a little. So we had to make sure that we could do things at scale. And so there was a lot of consideration in that as well. So sorry I couldn't give you the full framework, but if you want to hit me up offline, I could try and get it for you.
Great. And then I actually had a question from us here at the Startup Network. So we really are focusing on helping early idea stage founders. It's pretty much what we do day in, day out. And we give a lot of tactical advice. We, often give people advice specifically on building their startups, but we don't really concentrate too much on the cultural steps to success. So, starting with a foundation and a startup with a strong work-life balance, or maybe wearing company swag, or even just the way people write emails can kind of shape the character of a startup. Could founding a charitable initiative early on help create like a lasting culture of social responsibility within the team? And then, maybe how might this early focus on charity influence the team's dedication and alignment with the company's mission in the long run?
100%, I'd say. And I think the great example that we see and hear and read a lot about is probably Canva. And the founders of Canva from the very beginning wanted to set up a successful company that was successful, but was also a force for good. Like that was part of their core purpose right from the beginning. So to become one of the most valuable companies of the world, but also, be a force for good. And that has played out in multiple different ways. They're huge encouragers of getting their staff involved in volunteering and giving. They've gifted, 45,000 not-for-profits, I think, are now using for free their software. They're carbon neutral. They've got lots of sustainability practices. So kind of being a good company is core to the framework of what they do. And you do meet a lot of very passionate Canvanauts who are, they love working there because of the product, but they also love working there because of the culture that has been created through having that force for good right at the center. And I think, to top that off, the founders of Canva are also committed to philanthropy themselves. Mel and Cliff, through the Canva Foundation and everything they're doing there, and their commitment to give 80% plus of their wealth away to charity. And also some fantastically interesting work that Cameron Adams, the other founder, and his wife Lisa are doing in around the environmental space and the impact investment space. All of that together, I think there's absolutely no doubt that drives a culture of commitment.
Yeah, absolutely agree as well. We would do regular monthly all hands meetings at Edrolo, and we still do. And we would be reporting back on the things that we'd be doing with the charities that we're working with, or even just with individual customers, because we were very much a purpose-driven company. We're driven to improve educational outcomes of young people, no matter what their socioeconomic background is. And so we would share a lot of positive stories about impact at the student level or at the teacher level, at a class level, but also with the charities that we're working with, and attend their nights, their graduation nights for Skyland Education, for example, who we've worked with for quite a number of years now. And I guess that constant reminder feeds on itself, and you get more people wanting to get involved and help out as well.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I didn't see any other questions in the chat. Did anybody else have any questions they wanted to ask our speakers?
I have one. If I can jump on the mic.
Yes, please.
Just kind of maybe off the back of your question, Ryan, like when you're a founder, you're starting a business from scratch, you have a lot of things on your plate. You're trying to obviously market and sell it and build a sustainable business and hire and everything else. And when you're someone who also wants to, give back and get involved in charity, it's just kind of, it's another thing on the mirrored of items on the to-do list. So I just wonder if you had any advice specifically for sort of early stage founders who maybe don't have the resources, time, and capital to kind of spend a lot of time on setting something up, and just how they could get started in a practical sense.
Yeah, I might
fail, I guess, as well at the beginning.
Yeah. So back to how I started thinking, how I think about in terms of the types of resources that I have potential control over. Obviously, financial capital is probably going to be pretty thin when you're at the beginning stages, but you could start, a little bit, with your giving in that way. Find a charity that you want to support, and just see what sort of information flow you get and where the dollars are going, and understand how you can look at return on investment from that perspective. But I think more practically, is there a way for your startup or product to support, perhaps a charity, for example, or a cause that you're passionate about? and use it as a way to, I guess, as a win-win situation, similar to one of the comments earlier up. I think it was Christine, about giving 10% off, for example, to her not-for-profit clients. So there's ways like that. But I would also encourage you to use, perhaps, if they've got, you don't want to be taking up too much of their time, but utilize them as your test case users, beta users, and learn as much about your product from them as well. So again, it is a win-win, but be careful with this balancing of the scales there on both sides, yours and the charities or the customers.
And just to add to that, I'd say that the time pressures on a founder aren't only in the early stages of starting a company either. I mean, a lot of the people that I talk to who are seriously in the place now, sort of just on the cusp or even in the process of setting up a foundation, are often in direct line of sight of having some sort of exit. And when you're kind of going through a pre-exit or pre-funding round transaction, there's not a lot of extra time to be spending thinking about anything else other than your company. So that's where I think we do step in, is really to try and make sure that idea of philanthropy is top of mind for people so that they can set the structures up in place. And then often at the point that you finally do have that exit, founders suddenly do have some time before they leap into their next venture to spend time thinking about it. So we just want to make sure we're helping to guide people so that by the time there is time to think more about it, you're in a real position to sort of start deploying at a bigger scale.
Thank you, Beth. Thanks.
Great. Did we have any more questions from the crowd? I'm going to put the StartGiving website in the chat as well, just so you can take a look at ways to get involved right off the bat. As I said before, we'll go ahead and send out a formal email afterwards with all the information. But we do have a little bit of time, so if anybody wants to jump in with a couple last-minute questions, please feel free to utilize the mic or utilize the chat.
Well, I would just add to encourage anybody who's interested in finding out more, please do. As Ryan says, we'll send out some information after this, but we're here really to meet with you and talk you through the process and help you refine your thinking. So please do reach out and get in touch. StartGiving's here to help.
Cool. And then I would like to ask just one last question between you folks. What is in 5 years? What does success look like for us in this giving industry? What does it look like? Are we making solid progress, or is there an explosion of giving from Canva exit employees? What are we looking at here?
Yes, absolutely, to all of the above. I do think we hope to have an explosion in giving for sure, but I think it even goes beyond that. Is for us, it's not just having StartGiving. It's not just for us having a few billionaire founders who are doing giving, which is going to create millions and millions of dollars of new donations going out to the community. What we really want to see is that culture of giving, where there's more and more founders at every level who are giving in different ways, and it really is the sort of the expectation and the norm that if you're successful, you're excited by and interested in and passionate about and joyful about that process of giving. And we think that if we can do that successfully, and I do think there's real potential and appetite within the tech sector to do it, it will really be a guiding star to the rest of the community, and hopefully bring along all other people sort of within the corporate sector and elsewhere to also get involved in giving.
Yeah, and I think there's a parallel to the impact of successful startups have in terms of the flow-on effect to the investment capital that goes into the industry, the recycling of capital of early employees of say Canva or other successful companies. There's plenty of them. We focus very heavily on Canva, but there's the recycling of investment capital in angel investing, and then in the funds, and the funds get larger and so forth. But I think there's also the hope that it does that, and it is leading to more founders actually starting businesses. And if they've come from somewhere like Edrolo or Canva or Culture Amp, who have these foundations that are giving and have that culture of giving embedded within them, that hopefully from the very beginning of those founder journeys, we're going to see a compounding effect as well. So in 5 years, hopefully we're we're punching well above our weight from a percentage of GDP that's going to charitable organizations.
Great. And then we have, it looks like, one last question from Jen. Is StartGiving also supporting startups that are charities, or more about the established charities?
No, it's certainly not about just established charities or startup charities. Our focus is very much on the founders and encouraging them to get giving. But I would say from that startup charity perspective, I mean, that's one of the trends I didn't talk about earlier, but I do see is I think that, you know, entrepreneurial founders like to support and get behind other entrepreneurial founders. So I think there is a real interest in this space from, you know, startup founders to get behind charities that are also startups, because, you know, you share a passion, a vision, and an approach that really resonates. So we certainly encourage people to support those smaller startup charities, not just big established ones. 100%.
Yeah, I've got a perfect example of I'll shout out to Noel Lim at Anika Legal, based in Melbourne, supporting renters and dealing with their landlord issues, whether it's getting things fixed or, you know, a heater in not having a heater in winter, mold, etc. And the issues that a lot of renters face with terrible communications and things getting fixed. So we supported them most recently, and the only reason I knew about them is because he was hustling like all founders do and reached out to me just to connect. And I'm like, wow, you're doing some awesome stuff.
Good. Yeah, I like that. I like the idea. We hear about the big problems, but the small little local ones sometimes get overlooked, and it's ones that they can see and feel the most. Sometimes that are almost more important. So thank you so much for joining us today, folks, and thank you so much to our speakers, Antonia and Ben, and just a fantastic jump into the world of giving. And like I said, hopefully we can be punching well above our weight here in the near future with Australia. But again, thank you so much for joining us at the Startup Network virtual events. We do these all the time. We'll have another one on Friday. It's about crowd equity, the performance of how it was in 2023. And the virtual has released a report called Funded that we're going to go over all that kind of good stuff. Also, we have some big events next week. Our pitch night is on sports gaming and AR VR technology. Should be very cool. It's on Tuesday at the Collingwood Commons in Gibb Street. But until next time, I'll see you all, folks. And then again, like I said earlier, we'll send out a recording and an email with all the information. Okay. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Tanya. Thanks, Ron. See ya.
Bye.
Everyone.